That brings us to our final speaker for this session, Sian Ellett. Sian's going to give us the consumer perspective on all of these things that we've just heard about and how CF care has evolved. And of course, well, what does it mean being healthy for people with CF? Sian is a writer, speaker and meditation practitioner with a master's in creative writing, publishing and editing from the University of Melbourne. She grew up in New Zealand but has lived in Melbourne ever since 2010. She's been meditating with the Awakening Network for 3 years and is studying the Urban Mystic Training Program. She's halfway through her yoga teaching qualification with the Australian Yoga Academy, and she's published in Australian journals Text and Southerly, and has a blog at sianellett.com. I don't really know what a blog is, but... So thank you very much, Sian.
Thank you for that introduction. I have a feeling I have something very different to tell you today than what you've been hearing previously. So yes, what does being healthy mean for a person with CF? The answer to that question is different for every single person with CF, perhaps with a few common denominators. I'm just going to tell you today about what being healthy with CF means for me. I'm going to tell you my health journey. And perhaps there will be some common denominators for you to take away with you. Before I tell you my story, however, I'd like you to do a little exercise with me. Don't worry, you don't have to get out of your chair, though if you feel like moving while we're doing this exercise, you should. So, if you feel comfortable, I would like you to close your eyes. I want you to take a moment to notice your body. You might notice the inside or the outside more. You might be most aware of the sounds of your body, the smells or the tastes, the sight of your body, or the feel of it. Just notice your awareness. You might like to move the spotlight of your attention throughout your body. Where is your attention most drawn? Does one part feel different to another? Can you tell a difference? Are some parts talkative? Are some parts silent? Notice the thoughts you have. Are there different thoughts in different parts of your body? Now take your awareness to the contact of your body with what you're sitting on, and to the feeling of your feet on the ground. You might like to wriggle in your chair a bit if that helps, or move your toes in your shoes. And now become aware of this room we're in again. What can you hear? My voice? Other people? The air conditioning? What can you smell or taste? If you haven't already, slowly open your eyes. Notice what you can see. And now, just come back to this moment we're all having here together. Welcome back. Hello. Thank you for having me here. And thank you for doing that exercise with me. That was a very brief body awareness meditation. And if you'd like to know more about that, of course, please talk to me afterwards. As some background to me, as already said, I'm a writer and a speaker. I practice meditation and I'm halfway through my yoga teacher training. And I work part-time in the Graduate Research Centre at a university in Melbourne. My writing was first published in 2013 in a journal called Text. The piece is called Grief by Numbers, and it's a combination of memoir and critical essay about me and my family and my dad, who died when I was 4. Another piece of mine was published in Southerly Journal in October last year. It's called Chopin and Friedrich, and it's about a young man with cystic fibrosis who writes a poetic translation of one of Chopin's compositions and wonders about the possibility that Chopin might have had CF as well. And I, of course, also have CF and CF-related diabetes. Over the last 6 years, I have learnt an enormous amount about my health, and perhaps most importantly, about my relationship to health, and about health as a way of living. When I was young, my mum constantly told me my illness was only a small part of me, that it didn't dictate or define me. And for the 20 years that I was under her care, this belief was fairly innate. On some level, I didn't need to think about what CF meant because she had decided, and she carried the burden of the other possibilities. My lung function was always high. I was energetic. I played sports. I did theatre. I laughed a lot. In fact, I was constantly being told off either for laughing too loudly or too much. And I really just felt like everybody else. When I moved to Melbourne alone as a 21-year-old 6 years ago, I lost that innate belief. Partly because I was no longer under this watchful gaze of my mother, my siblings, my friends, doctors, all of these people who knew me and expected me to be the girl with CF who's always happy, always laughing, always healthy, never in hospital, never held down. And partly I lost that innate belief because I knew that it was acquired from the people around me, and that within me was a growing darkness about CF and about illness that I was trying to force away. And because I was trying to force it away, it was growing stronger. The more I forced it, the more I resisted it, the more it grew. And I knew that if I was going to support myself, I had to actually experience all those fears I had about being ill, about dying, about being contained and defined by illness, and I had to relearn how to be happy, healthy, laughing, alongside those things. This process was somewhat fast-forwarded by some of the treatment I first received when I got to Melbourne. The first doctor that I met, well, actually all of the first doctors that I met, expected me to be sick. They told me that I should come in and stay in the hospital straight away so that they could get to know my condition. They told me CF patients came in for an inpatient tune-up at least once a year. I had spent the last 10 years of my life defining my health by my ability to stay out of hospital. So this was pretty challenging to me on more than one level. And most discouragingly at that time, the healthcare professionals around me did not hear me when I said I'm healthy. They didn't believe me. And pretty quickly, I stopped believing me. These were professionals. These were the people with the knowledge and the power, so I must be wrong. I'd been on a trial medication in New Zealand that was incredibly beneficial to my breathing and my airway clearance, but I was told when I got to Melbourne that it was too much paperwork for them to fill out, for me to get it here. When I did persist, that doctor told me that he'd have to check with the boys first before he agreed that, yes, this medication was worth my having. But I suppose that's a whole different kind of problem. We won't go into that. At that time, coming into clinic became terrifying. I was constantly on the verge of tears. I was terrified and completely vulnerable to what other people told me was reality. Unfortunately, this attitude where the healthcare professional is the only one who could possibly understand my body, my illness, and my experience is pretty common, because healthcare professionals know a lot about illness, and you are doing your best to use that knowledge for the good of your patients. But as much as that is true, as much as charts and statistics say, my illness is not, in fact, the determiner of my health. My health determines my illness, and I determine my health. It takes a lot of effort to convince an intelligent expert in their field that I am healthy. And it takes nothing at all to convince them that I am sick, because one of those things they already believe. For a couple of years after I moved to Melbourne, it seemed a foregone conclusion that I would always feel and be sick, rather than alive, healthy, vital. I lost insight into my own health and into my own power during that time. I believed I had to exist within a paradigm of sickness, that this was the only way and that anything else was denial. And how I perceive myself is my reality, and it creates my reality. This all resulted in something really obvious, I suppose. I started to get sick. And even worse, I started to feel sick. My lung function dropped steadily, and I ended up in hospital several times. I had so prided myself on never having to stay in hospital, not since I was 9 years old, and they figured out I was doing my lung function test wrong and getting false low readings. And now I was back in hospital. And worst of all, with each admission, I sunk further and further into a body and a mind that was centered on and inside illness. Each visit was a trial. What had I failed to achieve this time? How high were my blood sugars now? How bad was my chest? My fear of illness became the biggest thing in my life. Sometimes it was all I could see and the only future I imagined. Taking medication was a reminder that I was ill, rather than a way to be healthy. It felt like an imposition. All of these extra things that I had to do every day, as people have mentioned today, for the rest of my life, or else I would be sick. And of course, that negative reinforcement of sickness was part of the problem. Everything was about my being sick, which made me feel more sick and get more sick. I found it difficult to accept that drinking enough water, exercising every day, eating regularly in a way that nourished and supported my body, sleeping enough each night, having time to relax, things that I've experienced our society often takes for granted, things we think of as optional, or that we're proud to be able to not do sometimes. These things take on life-giving or threatening significance in the management of a chronic condition. My ability to take medications and adhere to treatment is not just about treatment, it's about needing support for all the other things I have to do every day that can affect me just as much as failing to adhere to treatment. My biggest struggle with adherence was with insulin, or with diabetes, in fact, because that adherence was very tied up with how I felt about diabetes, which was, for a very long time, incredulous and enraged. How dare I have developed another chronic illness with all of its own pitfalls, lifestyle requirements, medications, and mythologies, alongside the lifetime of ones I already had for CF. I found for a long time, to the detriment of my mood, body, concentration, strength, that I managed this by completely ignoring it. It was too hard, too big, too scary. I took the tablets. Later, I took the shots of long and short-acting insulin, but I made no connection to the fact that these treatments were not being sent to torment me, that they were keeping me alive. And I cultivated a powerful inability to see that the way I was eating and living were actually making me sick. My haphazard regime for diabetes covered me for a little while, but eventually it stopped working. And I went on ignoring my body, or being unaware of my body, more specifically. In 2009, just before I moved to Melbourne, my HbA1c was 11.5. And I was unable, at the time, to deal with the consequences. I was exhausted by just the thought of what I would need to do in order to live healthily. I was trapped inside this idea of illness. My mum and GP in New Zealand tried to impress upon me the reasons I needed to behave differently by talking about some of the horrific things that can happen to your body when diabetes is out of control, which I'm sure you can imagine. And those things fed my fear, my denial, my exhaustion, my sense of being trapped even more. They did not help me focus on being healthy. The culmination of those years, between 2009 and 2012, of feeling and becoming sick, was that in September of 2012, when I was in New Zealand on holiday, I ended up in hospital with unbearable stomach pains. They thought I had a bowel obstruction, and after 24 hours in the hospital trying to fix it, they came into my room at about 9 a.m. on Sunday morning, and they said they were going to operate in half an hour. And it was about the smallest I've ever felt, most terrified, most alone, most helpless. I was sitting alone in the hospital bed in my hospital gown when they came in, and I started to cry when the surgeon said they would operate in half an hour. And he said, "Are you all right?" And I said, "What do you think?" But then I apologised because he was about to operate on me. My brother arrived with his girlfriend, and she leant down to give me a hug, and I hardly knew this girl, but these terrified sobs ripped out of me, so much that I could barely breathe. I cried the whole way down 5 floors to the operating theatre. I have never felt so close to illness or to dying as I did that morning. They thought it might just be a quick fix. They were going to try keyhole surgery. It might just be 40 minutes. And 6 hours later, I woke up to a 21-centimetre scar down the middle of my stomach. They found not a bowel obstruction, but adhesions from an operation when I was 24 hours old. Stuck all through my gut, and they spent 5 hours cutting them all out. And then I spent 4 weeks in hospital fighting my way back to life. I spent 2 weeks throwing up everything I ate or drank, which was better than that tube they put down your nose into your stomach, by the way. I had to learn to walk again. I could barely get to my own door holding onto my IV pole. I couldn't shower alone. I couldn't eat. I lost any sense I had had previously of my own body. My sister was sitting with me one of those days in hospital, and I started to get agitated. My hands kept fluttering, and I started moving and getting restless, and she kept saying, "What's wrong? What do you need? What is it? What's wrong?" And I kept saying, I don't know. And then she said, "Can you not breathe properly?" And I looked at her completely surprised, and I said, "No, I can't." My oxygen was at 70%. How could I not have known that? How could I have been so completely unaware of my own body? What I learnt as I started to meditate was that my awareness of my body was extremely limited to begin with. Why would I spend time noticing my own body when it was only a site of trauma and illness? It was much easier, more pleasurable to be aware of thoughts, feelings, other people, their experiences, than to rest inside my own skin in pain and frightened. I really didn't know that I could experience anything but trauma in my own body. 2 weeks into my recovery in hospital, I realised I hadn't smiled or laughed since the operation. And that was one of the most frightening moments for me. I thought I might never feel joy again. And I knew in that moment of awareness that I was going to have to choose joy. I was going to have to make my life about joy once more if I was going to survive and if I wanted to survive. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But I did choose joy. And I chose health. And I keep choosing health. I'd started to meditate just 3 months before that emergency operation. I'd barely dipped my toe into the ocean. But since then, meditation has taught me or introduced me to my own mind, to my body, to my spirit. It taught me about everything I was holding in that I could let go of, and everything I was withholding from myself, my ability to be well, to be better than anyone expected, to be more than what others define me to be. One of the most important meditations in respect to those things is called the Complete Health Meditation. It's a recording by a man called Ken Mellor. I first did this after I returned to Melbourne from my hospital sojourn. And for the first time in my life, I considered that I could be healthy and what it would mean if I allowed myself to feel healthy. I realized my framework could be health, not illness. Meditating on complete health was what helped me to focus on my treatment being about my health, not about my illness. I take my medication, and I do my treatment because I'm healthy, not because I'm sick. The words I use to describe myself mean something. How I think about myself means something. It changes me and it changes the people around me. And how others think about me can change me too. I remember talking to one of the CF team in Melbourne about my lung function going up and up and up. And her saying to me, "This never happens." To which I replied, "But it does happen." She replied, "It almost never happens." And I said, "But it can happen." And she looked at me for a moment and she smiled and she said, "Yes, it can. Here you are." And I think we both felt oddly relieved. At the same clinic visit, the lung function technician, when he saw how high the readings were, frowned and said, "That might be a fluke." And I immediately leant forward and said, a little more strongly than either of us expected, "Don't say that. It's not a fluke, it's amazing." And he gave me a very shocked laugh and he said, "Sorry, yes it is." Encouraging my own sense and experience of health works partly because it makes taking medication and doing treatment, exercising, drinking enough water, eating the right food, taking the right supplements, it makes those things easy, or at least easier. They become my desires rather than the things I fight or avoid because they feel too big or they remind me of illness. Once I started thinking, these are the things I get to do every day for the rest of my life in order to be amazingly healthy. And my God, what a wonderful and seemingly simple change in perspective. Every day I continue to overcome my old belief that my body is weak or that it can't do things. I'm stronger now than I've ever been in every way possible. Every day I continue to grow my awareness of myself, my body, my mind, my spirit. I keep facing the different old patterns that come up and the call to illness that still raises its head. I let them run through me, and then I let them run out of me. Health, for me, means admitting when life feels really tough, admitting when things are a struggle, allowing myself the sadness that swells up, the anger, the resentment. Health means knowing when I need a day off, or extra medication, or extra care. Health means asking for help. It means finding love inside my most difficult experiences, finding joy inside my body. Health means realizing that no emotion, no experience, no thought feels worse than repression. I've come back to that innate belief of my childhood, that I am infinitely more than my illness. At the moment, I'm still learning to embody that empowerment in the moments when it is hardest to access, when I am experiencing sickness or struggle. I'm teaching myself that getting sick does not mean that I am sick. I trained myself to understand that all the things I need to do to be healthy are actually easier than the avoidance and the denial I felt before. And once I decided illness was manageable, it became more manageable. And it sits next to my heart now because it is the thing that ultimately taught me that I am health. And none of this is about ignoring the painful or difficult realities of illness. I still feel those things, but I also let them go because they don't need to live inside my skin. Each day I choose how I experience my body, my life, and my health. I choose joy. And my joy is more powerful than illness. Thank you.